Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Guilty. That's the verdict for R. Kelly. Women's rights attorney Gloria Allred gives us her take on the jury's monumental decision. Plus, remembering Gabby Petito.
Our focus is still on mourning Gabby and honoring Gabby.
As the Petito family mourns a life cut short, the FBI manhunt targets Brian Laundrie. And a look inside the relationship of former billionaire Elizabeth Holmes and Sonny Balwani. What personal text messages were on display in her federal trial. And later,
these are injuries that are essentially invariably fatal.
The medical examiner takes the stand in the Mennonite murder trial. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. It's a guilty verdict for R. Kelly after months in federal court for years' worth of sex crimes. This as sexual assault advocates and women's rights attorney alike applaud the verdict. On Monday, a federal jury found R. Kelly guilty on all counts, charging him with sex trafficking and racketeering crimes. The trial stretching close to 6 weeks with testimony from 50 witnesses, many who are victims of Kelly's sexual abuse, most of the victims under the age of 18 at the times of the crimes. Victims provided traumatic testimony recounting that Kelly knowingly transmitted herpes to some. Others say he locked them in a room without food or water for days on end. One woman testified to when Kelly beat her with a shoe and forced her to get an abortion. Even 2 John Does testified that they too were sexually abused by Kelly. The jury deliberated for just 9 hours in the case. Kelly now faces life in prison and additional charges in Illinois and Minnesota. We're joined by famed women's rights attorney Gloria Allred, who represents some of the victims in R. Kelly's trial. Gloria, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Brian.
Always a pleasure. Now, Gloria, you've said of all the high-profile cases you've taken on, R. Kelly was the worst offender of all, more so than even Harvey Weinstein. What sets him apart from the rest and makes him, in your eyes, worst of all?
Well, first of all, he took advantage of vulnerable underage girls, and he used his fame to lure them in. And of course, he also had his powerful business empire to enable and support him, because many people in his inner circle assisted him in recruiting these underage girls and then victimizing them. And as you just mentioned, he also had genital herpes. He knew that he had this sexually transmitted disease, but despite the fact that he knew it, he did not disclose it to at least the individuals that I represent. And further, he did not use a condom, which would have lessened the risk of transmission of the disease. As a result, many of the underage girls are left with a lifetime of suffering from genital herpes. And finally, he had his rules, and he punished these women if they did not obey every rule or disobeyed any rule. And he also required many of them to engage in child pornography with him. So he is so horrific that he would take underage girls and he directed and he produced this child pornography. And then often he would use it not only for his sexual pleasure to watch it, but to use it to threaten them that if he ever told anything about him to anyone, if they ever did, that he would release some of these humiliating and shameful videos.
Yeah, quite the list there. This case was a huge win in terms of the Me Too movement and women's rights. What could this verdict mean for future cases? And do you think it could encourage more women to come forward?
I do think that it sends a message to other high-profile predators that they are not above the law, and that if they victimize underage girls or adults in the way that Kelly did, and he had a plan, he had a scheme, he manipulated them, that, even though he tried to control them, that women are not going to be controlled. And when these women broke free, as many of my clients did, they found their power, they found their courage, and they decided after they contacted me that they did want to speak to law enforcement, and that was an option for them. And I'm so proud of them that they were willing to testify at trial. 3 of the 5 victims for whom charges were filed testified at the trial, and those 3 were my clients. The other 2 who testified were not. And of course, the 6th victim for whom charges were filed is Aaliyah, and she is deceased, so she couldn't testify. But I had another witness who testified about seeing her in abusive sexual conduct by R. Kelly with her. So, it took a lot of courage because they had to undergo intense cross-examination, but they survived it. And that's how this verdict was won. And I think the federal prosecutors did a great job. Homeland Security did an exceptional job. So that's how, it's not just Time's Up, because I've been doing, this for 47 years. We've been the leading women's rights, victims' rights law firm in the nation. And women have had the courage over those 47 years to do exactly what my clients did. Testify in criminal cases, sometimes no criminal case, but they file a civil lawsuit against the predator. Sometimes we did confidential settlements without any lawsuit with the predator. And so, let's not underestimate the courage of women. But I think that's the problem for powerful men, whether they're in the music industry, the entertainment industry, sports, business, religious world, whatever. These victims may have the last word. In this case, they did.
Thank you very much for that, Gloria Allred, and all the work you've done, not only in this case, but in past and future cases. Thank you.
Very much. Great to be with you.
Thank you. And now to Florida, where the Parkland shooter is set to stand trial, but for a crime unrelated to the school shooting. Nicholas Cruz is charged with 34 counts of premeditated and attempted murder for the 2018 shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. 17 students and staff were killed in the shooting. While a trial date has not yet been set for that crime, Cruz now faces additional charges for attacking a detention deputy in a Broward County jail back in 2018. In a hearing on Tuesday, the defense argued that not all audio and video of the incident was preserved, and therefore the trial should be dismissed. Cruz is charged with battery of a law enforcement officer. That trial is set to begin on Monday. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the Mennonite murder trial. A U.S. airman faces a hefty prison sentence after a young Mennonite woman is brutally killed. But first, the family of Gabby Petito has a message for Brian Laundrie. The latest on the FBI manhunt and more after this.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. 2 weeks, that's how long it's been since anyone has seen or heard from Brian Laundrie. New information, though, shows Laundrie was camping with his family just days after Gabby Petito was found killed. Authorities say Petito was killed in late August. Her remains were found in mid-September. On September 1st, Brian Laundrie returned to his family home in Florida without Petito. The Laundrie family attorney now confirms Brian and his family were camping in East Central Florida between September 6th and 8th. All this as the FBI manhunt for Laundrie ramps up, basing the search on intelligence and DNA matching. The FBI has also obtained surveillance video from the campsite area. Authorities have not explicitly linked him to Petito's death, but have issued a federal warrant for his arrest in relation to illegally using another person's debit card. Meanwhile, Gabby Petito's family issued a plea for Brian Laundrie to give himself up. Law and Crime's Angie Levy has more on the search for Laundrie and the ways Petito's family is honoring her.
We actually got behind a car yesterday, and there was a Wyoming sticker, and the letters were GBZ.
Gabs.
So Gabs. She's with us. She's with us.
Gabby Petito's mom, Nicole, breaking down as she talks about the signs she sees that Gabby is still with her.
Our focus is still on mourning Gabby and honoring Gabby.
The family displayed Let It Be tattoos they got in Gabby's memory, the same tattoos she had, and they're setting up the Gabby Petito Foundation to help the families of missing people, a plea from Gabby's dad.
I want to ask everyone to help all of the people that are missing and need help. And like I said before, it's on all of you, everyone that's in this room, to do that. And if you don't do that for other people that are missing, that's a shame.
The FBI is searching for Brian Laundrie, named a person of interest in Gabby Petito's disappearance. Reality TV star Dog the Bounty Hunter joined the search and said he received information that Laundrie and his parents camped at Florida's Fort DeSoto Park after he returned from Wyoming without Gabby Petito. The attorney for Laundrie's parents confirms they camped with Brian and left the park together, but denies the parents are helping their son evade police and said the FBI is aware of the camping trip. Steve Bertolino told one reporter Dog was spewing baloney, but Bertolino told Law&Crime, "I will no longer give that dog credibility or dignify his false claims with the time of my reply." The lawyer for the Petito family has a message for Brian Laundrie.
The Laundries did not help us find Gabby. They're sure as not going to help us find Brian. For Brian, we're asking you to turn yourself in to the FBI or the nearest law enforcement agency.
Gabby Petito's family thanked law enforcement and all of the people who helped them search for Gabby in Wyoming. Their attorney also said they are 100% happy with the FBI's investigation so far. For Law&Crime Daily, I'm Anjanette Levy.
Joining us today is legal analyst Dina Dahl and Terry Austin. Dina, with an arrest warrant out for Laundrie, not for Petito's death, but for using someone else's debit card. If the FBI does find him, could they even hold him for a long time based on what info they have?
You know, I think the reason why we're seeing the warrant for the big cards is because it's much easier at this point for them to have to prove. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have enough evidence to also issue a warrant for her murder. It was ruled a homicide. We don't know everything the FBI knows, but they don't need to play that hand right now. If they have him in custody and they need to keep him, they could issue most likely the warrant for that and keep him longer.
Makes sense. Terry, why do you think there's a delay in connecting Petito's cause of death to something or someone?
You know, Brian, it's difficult to determine the cause of death if the body has been exposed to heat and the elements. And we know for a fact that Brian came back on September 1. So even assuming from that date, her body was found on September 19th. That's a couple of weeks. It would be very difficult to get evidence from a body that would be that decomposed. The other thing is that there are multiple areas where the crime might have occurred, like the van and the forest or the desert where she was found.
All right, so still a lot of information and evidence to be collected to finally pinpoint what, if anything, happened, and of course, where is Brian Laundrie? Thank you both. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, the medical examiner takes the stand in the trial of a U.S. airman, Mark Gooch. Plus, a look inside the intimate relationship of Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani. The latest in her federal trial after the break. Welcome back. Personal text messages come to light in the federal trial of Elizabeth Holmes. On Tuesday, jurors saw the back and forth between Holmes and former romantic partner Ramesh Sunny Balwani. The texts show the pair collected upwards of $250 million from investors, including Rupert Murdoch, just days after a lab director quit due to compliance issues. Balwani replied to the text, quote, "They are not investing in our company, they are investing in our destiny." Former Theranos lab director Addon Rosendorf testifying he felt Theranos higher-ups would not provide resources needed for a proficiency test. Founded back in 2003, Holmes claimed the now-defunct Theranos would revolutionize blood testing. Later, investigations found many issues with its programs. The former billionaire faces 12 fraud charges in connection to her time with the company. Let's bring back legal analyst Dina Dahl and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, how damning are these text messages, and do they rule out any argument that Holmes may have been forced to act based on her relationship with Balwani?
Those text messages are very damning and very insightful. They're showing that there is fraud because they're soliciting funds, a lot of money, frankly, and they know that there are problems with their testing. And when you have a lab director get on the stand and say that he was talking about quality control issues and his warnings were ignored, that's a big problem. So far, also, Brian, I haven't seen any evidence that Balwani was the one who was controlling. This was a power couple, but the power behind this couple was definitely Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah. Now, Dana, if the power is behind Elizabeth Holmes, Balwani has to be watching Holmes' trial. Do you think what is coming out in the trial is making Balwani's future trial that much harder for him?
I actually think it makes it easier. He gets to see what holes maybe he can poke, the defense attorney. And also, I imagine we're going to see him blame Elizabeth Holmes, just like we're seeing her blame him. Whether or not the jury buys that or not, we'll see. So, but I do think it could help him to see in hindsight what worked and didn't work for her.
Yeah, I think both sides are going to end up doing the proverbial throwing each other under the bus. The downside here is oftentimes there's space enough under that bus for two. We'll continue to follow this case and see how it progresses. Thank you both. In other top legal news, a trial for an Army veteran accused of breaking into buildings and landmarks to take daring photos is delayed so he can get a mental health evaluation. Isaac Wright traveled the country scaling buildings and bridges to take breathtaking photos and post them on social media under the name Drifter Shoots. While the photos are beautiful, police in several cities, including Cincinnati and New Orleans, say Wright committed crimes such as burglary to take these photos. Wright said he's an artist and the photography helps with his post-traumatic stress disorder. The judge in the Cincinnati case has ordered a psychiatric evaluation to determine the best way to proceed with the case. When we come back, testimony in Arizona for the man charged with the murder of 27-year-old Sasha Krause. The latest on the Mennonite murder trial when we come back. Welcome back. Well, just when we thought we were done with Robert Durst, there is still more to uncover for the infamous real estate heir. His first wife's family announces they want to pursue charges against his current wife. Earlier this month, Durst was convicted of murdering his best friend, Susan Berman. The prosecution argued Berman was killed because she had information about the murder of Durst's first wife, Kathy. Though a body has never been found, Durst is also accused of that murder. Now, Kathy Durst's family hopes to press charges against Durst's wife, Deborah Cheriton. A court document filed Tuesday states that Cheriton should be charged with bigamy, alleging Cheriton married Durst to assist him in criminal acts and to conceal his criminal activities. The 17-page request includes evidence that was presented in Durst's most recent trial, including a recorded conversation between Cheriton and Durst in jail. Sentencing for Durst's conviction in Berman's murder is set for October 18th. And in Arizona, the medical examiner takes the stand in the trial of a United States airman accused of murdering a Mennonite woman. 22-year-old Mark Gooch is accused of kidnapping and murdering 27-year-old Sasha Krause, a member of a New Mexico Mennonite community. Gooch is charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and theft. He pled not guilty to all charges. Krause was last seen shopping for Sunday school supplies in January 2020. About a month later, her body was found near Flagstaff, Arizona. At the time, Gooch was stationed at an Air Force base in Phoenix. An autopsy revealed Krause died of blunt force trauma and a gunshot wound to the head. A crime lab reported that the bullet taken from Krause's skull was fired from a gun that Gooch had in his possession. Cell phone records put Gooch in the area at the suspected time of the crime. On Wednesday, the prosecution called the case's medical examiner to the stand, who detailed Krause's injuries and her cause of death.
She did have a skull fracture on, kind of in the region where that laceration was, there was a fracture of the skull underneath that area. That fracture lined up with where the bullet had pushed through or perforated the skull. So I determined the cause of death to be a gunshot wound, injury of the head, and a blunt force injury of the head.
Dina, rarely does a medical examiner's testimony connect the murderer to the murderer. But does the evidence come from the fact that the bullet came from this gun and can be traced back to Gooch's possession, does that create a more incentive that he should be found guilty?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't any DNA evidence on him. So this ballistic evidence and the connection that the examiner makes that, yes, one of the causes of death was from a bullet. It was from a bullet that he owned. His brother has already been charged with trying to retrieve it after the announcement of her death, is a very strong piece of evidence for the prosecution.
Now, Terry, the medical examiner said that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head and blunt force trauma to the head. Does that indicate anything to you?
It does, Brian. The testimony of a medical examiner is always critical. And especially if you have a murder case like this, he's saying it's blunt force trauma to the head, a gunshot wound to the head. To me, that indicates this was intentional and it was planned out. It is an execution style murder. So when there's something like that, you have to look at what the motive might have been. And here we already know from evidence that we've talked about, there were texts about his disdain for the Mennonite religion. And if that's the case, as an investigator, what I would do is look for all of that information, tie it back to the motive, and that way they have a very strong case.
Speaking of strong cases, it seems like something's missing in this case, Terry. We have, as you said, those text messages for disdain for the Mennonite community. You have a Sunday school teacher, not just someone who's a part of religion, but participates pretty heavily in it. Why do you think there are no hate crime charges in this case?
Brian, that's an excellent point. And maybe if we have some more evidence down the line about the fact that he had hate and he had disdain for this religion. We know that he was a former Mennonite person and he practiced that religion. And in fact, Arizona has a hate crime statute that basically says if there's any evidence that the crime was based on the hate of your identity, and the fact that you are part of that religion is part of your identity.
Exactly. Well, obviously those charges aren't here, but we'll continue to follow this case, and thank you both. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.